champion quickly goes through. Let's go as well.
We have with us today a former double Winter Olympic snowboarder hailing from my neck of the woods up in the northeast of Scotland. Representing Team GB in the halfpipe, his career has started, I think, around at the age 9. Competed at World Junior Champs, European Open, and multiple World Cups and lots of competitions alike. Around at the age 16, he was promoted to the British snowboarding team, competing at his first World Cup. Narrowly missing out on the Turin Olympic qualification in 2006, he went on to aim making the Vancouver 2010 Winter Olympics. Whilst he is classed as a halfpipe specialist, he has also competed in the slopestyle and big air disciplines. He is one of GB's finest snowboarders, and now as a businessman running and operating his own public gym, The Unit, I'd very excitedly like to introduce Ben Kilner to the Honest Athlete podcast.
Lovely.
Welcome.
Thank you for that lovely intro.
No worries.
Transcript that, Ben, and get that on your LinkedIn, I think.
Yeah, I know. Well, I don't. I suppose I don't have a LinkedIn, but I should get Hannah to write it, shouldn't I?
100%. Just get it for that. Don't you ever use it. Don't do anything with it, but just put Hannah Miley once said. There you go.
Oh, brilliant.
Thanks for coming on, Ben. It's brilliant to have you on, and it's just cool to have a snowboarder on.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, it's great to do stuff like this because it also gives me sort of the opportunity to sort of remember the past as well when I get asked questions. So yeah, no, thank you.
Now, my first question I always like to ask the guests is, how do you get into your sport? And obviously snowboarding isn't something that you do with school once a week. So how did that start? What made you get into the sport?
Yeah, well, I don't know if you remember when you were a child, we seem to have a lot more white winters in Scotland. And I think it got to the point where our schools were closed so often that everyone went sledging at their local sort of hill or golf course. For me, it was honestly, it was about 300-meter walk to the third hole at my local golf course. And that's kind of where I saw the first ever snowboarder. And I think I'd taken my sledge. So I was just trying to stand up on my sledge to start with. And then my mum and dad bought me some snowboard lessons up in Glenshee. And that's kind of where it all took off. I was just that annoying kid that pestered my parents to take me up to the hills almost every weekend then from that point.
Certainly think I can even remember even when I was younger standing on standing on a sledge, not quite replicating snowboard, but just being the rebel kid of who could stay on the longest or stay standing. Never my forte. Prefer it when the snow was more in liquid form than in the sort of snow frosty form. So you were quite young when you started in snowboarding, and I guess I always kind of imagine snowboarding seems quite a dangerous sport, but as a youngster, you had no fear. Was that pretty much the same for you throughout your whole career? Was there any point that you think snowboarding is quite impactful, both physically as well? Was there any fears or worries, I guess, from you or your parents taking up snowboarding?
Yeah, I suppose when we're all young, we are all fearless because we've not yet learned about injuring ourselves or hurting ourselves. We don't really know what pain is. So I think sometimes when you start a career in extreme sports, it really depends how many years you go by without injuring yourself properly to determine whether you actually start getting a few little fears. And I think to start with, I went without injury for quite a while, and then I remember getting like my first ever concussion, and I just remember like, oh my god, like if you fall, you can really hurt yourself. And I suppose I used to just be that little kid that sort of fell over, got up on his feet, carried on, and then suddenly when I got a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier, gravity was sort of pulling me towards earth that little bit harder. And I think the sort of fear does kick in, but I think you analyze things that little bit differently. You stop just throwing yourself upside down and hoping you land on your feet. You actually calculate things a little bit more.
Mathematical kind of bit that kind of comes into it then, if you're having to calculate or...
Yeah, so I suppose like the thing is, the higher you go, the slower you've got to rotate. So it's normally, I'm sure there's some equation out there somewhere, but really the smaller you go, the quicker you have to rotate. So you had to really figure out your speed on a lot of things when you're going off a jump. Whether the jump was bigger, that meant you had to slow down your rotation more. So that's where you had to do all this without actually realizing it was more of a subconscious thing. It's okay, let's go and hit the 20-meter jump. That means that we've got to really like slow everything quite down in comparison to a 2-meter jump where you have to spin like a one of the freestyle skiers. So the aerials, sorry. So yeah, it's I suppose the fear factor for things like that comes into play. You just have to be a bit smarter.
When I was reading up about you, Ben, a bit more, you competed in the men's halfpipe. That was your main event. Am I right?
Yes, yeah, that's right.
That's like Hannah Miley's 400 medley, my 100 backstroke. But you also compete in slope style and big air disciplines.
Yes.
How does that work? So do you just learn to snowboard, and like in swimming, you progress and your main event sort of comes to you and you just...
Yeah,
oh,
I suppose like this will probably be similar to you guys, but you've got to... we've all got that one discipline that we really do well in, and we focus a little bit more energy on because that would potentially get us further in the career, for example, or give us a medal hope in that particular discipline. So I didn't want to spread myself too thin. And what you'll find is a lot of the snowboarders are either slope style big air or they're half pipe only. It's very rare that you get a snowboarder that does both half pipe and slope style and big air. But I think they both complement each other. It's kind of like if you just focus on front crawl, for example, it will help with one part of the medley, but it doesn't. You're better to almost in the medley. I suppose it's better to be like the better at everything individually. If this makes sense, jack of all trades almost. But so for me, it was kind of like I couldn't spread myself thin. I couldn't be jack of all trades. I had to be the sort of master of one, which was half pipe. So that's quite common in snowboarding and skiing, like freestyle skiing. You tend to find it's very rare that we're very good at both at Olympic level.
So for those listening who might be coming into this not having much knowledge about snowboarding, could you give us maybe a brief description on those three disciplines? Like what separates them? Why? What makes them different from each other?
Yeah, well, half pipe is extremely technical. It requires absolute precision because half pipe walls are an average Olympic half pipe is probably between 22 and 24 foot high. So to give yourself a sort of an idea, that it's bigger than most houses. The transition, if you were to jump too hard on the transition, you would fall down the transition that little bit further, but that feels like jumping off a 2-story building just onto the flat ground. So if you get it wrong, it goes really wrong. But if you get it right, it honestly, it feels like you're floating on clouds. And I think that there's so many variables to half pipe in comparison to slope style, where you're just calculating speed. The jump's the same, the landing's the same, and you just make sure that you've got the right speed for that. Whereas in snowboarding, you've got to have the right speed and you have to have the right takeoff every time you go up in the air in half pipe. So I think that I can't say that slopestyle and big air is easier at all, but I think if you ask most snowboarders, they would definitely say that half pipe is far more technical.
I now feel like I'm going to be watching the Winter Olympics. Like, I know all of it now. I can commentate. Don't worry, family. We can mute the TV. I've got this. Thank you for that. It's really good to learn, obviously, new things. That's what this podcast is all about, and speak to athletes like yourself. But just going back to your start in snowboarding, basically, started competing at age 10. And then I've got next, became British champion at age 13. Now, that's not normal, surely, because it's definitely not in swimming. It's like a slog. It's like I started at 9, I just got my first title at 18. Whereas I was like reading the information. I had to read it like 4 times. I was like, wait, age 10, age 13. What was that like at 13 winning British champs?
I don't know. It's very hard because see that point in, I suppose, my career, that was kind of the start of the career, I would call it, because I just enjoyed it every year. It was every winter I was snowboarding between the ages of sort of 10 and 13. Whereas all of a sudden, as soon as I hit 13, I went straight out to Canada, continued the season. And that was where I think everything really progressed. But the British champs was just kind of like although I went there to try to win, I don't think it really soaked in that much. It was almost like I always remember Salt Lake City games where had just been, halfpipe had just been on, and that was when I was like, oh my God, I want to get to the Olympics. I want to be at that level. And I think what I was doing that particular season was I was going straight out to California to go compete in my first kind of international event, and all the Olympic medalists were competing in the same event. So I was like completely thrown in at the deep end, from the sort of British competitive scene to the complete international scene. So that was kind of like the British Championships. I'm not going to demeanor it whatsoever because I was so happy to win, but I think my focus was on the bigger picture at the time.
For someone so young, that's such a mature perspective to have, which is really, really quite impressive. And you mentioned there, by the age of 13, you're traveling Canada, California. What about schoolwork? Because I guess being a snow sport, snow's not always around in Britain. You probably had to travel to find the snow. So how much did that impact, I guess, education and balancing that sort of sport athlete lifestyle with schoolwork?
Yeah, so I suppose I'm quite lucky in a sense. Like, I started snowboarding when I was in primary school. So my primary teachers actually spoke to the Bankery Academy and almost give them a little heads up that I'm a snowboarder. I travel every now and then. I take time off, and I think that helped because I was basically on a mission that I didn't want anyone to sort of hold me back. So, and you know what, Bankery Academy were absolutely brilliant, and they are with anyone that's got a sporting promise. They don't want to be a barrier, so they arranged with my teachers to sort of project further into the future in their sort of classroom and get all this homework gathered for me. And then I used to travel away with it, with all these books. And I swear that's probably where most the sort of baggage allowance came from, was paying for the weight in books of homework. So yeah, and then I had some brilliant teammates who also helped me. I had some mathematicians, had someone that spoke fluent French. So it really helped me on the road.
And so following on from that then, I'd love to know what the training split was like, what it is like for a snowboarder, and how does that, obviously you fit that, your education around that, but how much of it is actually outside in the snow? I don't know how you'd word it.
No, it's a good question. Yeah. So we typically, if you were on like a long camp, let's say you were out there for a month, you would stick to a fair structure of about 4 days on, 1 day off, and then you would do 3 days on and then 1 day off. and you would stay with that as much as you could. But if the weather implications obviously played a huge part. So if there was a guaranteed 5 days of sun and then you saw that there was a storm coming in, you would just maximize your time and be basically training fairly smart across those 5 sunny days to make sure you really sort of made the most of that weather window. Because a lot of the times you are battling with the elements, and things can go either windy or cloudy or snowy. It's been too cold as well at times. It's been about -40 in some places where we are, and you just can't train in that.
Makes me kind of appreciate the heat of poolside.
Well, I was going to say, you're so lucky.
I love Ponds Forge.
Yeah. Oh man. So kind of continuing on with the training element, like I find it quite fascinating. I guess as a swimmer, like for us, it is predictable in a sense of we know exactly what time we need to be there, how long we're in the pool for, the breaks, and it is the same. So going the 4 days on, 1 day off, looking at the weather, do you have like a set amount of time, like your training session for that day is going to last like 2-3 hours or less, or do you have days where you get more maybe prep work in the gym rather than on the snow? Or it would just be kind of like, what would a typical, like maybe 2-3 days in a life of a professional snowboarder would be?
Yeah, so I suppose if you're sort of battling jet lag, your days are normally fairly like easy to start with. But if we're acclimatized already, then your day would always be figuring things out to start with. So day number 1 is get out there, get a feel for the place. Let's say we're going in the half pipe, you get a feel for what the shape is like, and acclimatize to the sort of altitude. And then I suppose if you were comfortable that day, then you would start actually introducing some of your sort of, I would say, sort of base level tricks. And then the next day you would go in with this sort of confidence. So half pipes tend to keep their shape fairly well in good conditions. So you can trust it. It's all about trusting the half pipe. So you find that the next day, sometimes guys will drop in and they'll pretty much be doing their competition run, first run of the day. Whereas other times it takes about sort of 5-6 runs before you can actually build up to that. So I would say you probably average between about 6 to 15 runs in a day. 15 being a very kind of long day. That's quite a tiring day on the legs. So 6 being you've done your job, you've done really well, you haven't fallen, your coach tells you to go home.
Interestingly then, how does the coaching side work? Like, are they there all the time? And, I don't know where they watch from. Do they have like a secret tower that they're like over the trees just watching you go down every time?
Well, it's quite funny. So coaches have all got their different points where they coach from. Most of them are actually right at the bottom of the half pipe, and right in the middle run, they'll tell you obviously by your or whatever, and tell roughly what timing you are on the lift laps as well. So they'll know that it'll take you, let's say, 20 minutes to get back up to the top of the chairlift and everything involved. So they kind of know your schedule, and they'll have that with each athlete. So sometimes they'll be they've all got their different styles, and I think a really good coach adapts the way he is with each athlete individually. Some people need pushed harder than others. Some people just need left to their own device. For me, normally, I always get that feeling like I always really want to impress my coach every day. So I was always trying to warm up super quick and get straight into it, so that he was like, all right, cool, Ben, like, let's go.
The question I get asked a lot, and possibly you as well, Lauren, when some of the younger athletes coming into it, because I feel there's always a generational shift. Nowadays, we've got a lot of social media, there's a lot of social pressures. So the socialization side of things, I think, is really, really key. But for you as a winter sport athlete, you do have to travel an awful lot. So for you, socializing with your friends at home is obviously going to be very limited or very difficult. So for you, your sort of aspect and being on, I guess teams, they were kind of, I'm assuming, close friends for you, but it was just to kind of get a feel for, how did you balance the sort of social aspect as well as being a sort of a student athlete?
Yeah, I mean, that was actually really hard. I think especially as I sort of formed into a bit more of a serious athlete, I had to start saying no to these sort of social. So, look at him here. He's just staring at me with these puppy eyes. Yeah, I mean, I found it really hard at times. I mean, you guys all been the same, that when your friends at home are off to a party, you had to make the decision and know that you were going to your training maybe the next day, and I'm gonna get rid of my dog.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah, so I find making sure that you do make sure that you're not just focusing 100% on yourself. I think it's also important to keep your friends around you, and obviously with your teammates, you see them all the time, and your teammates understand the world of travel, but sometimes the friends back at home don't understand what goes on. So I always found that I had like different groups of friends in different parts of the world, and none of them knew each other, but they all knew me, type thing. So it was nice to come home because it was back to normality, and then it was nice to go away because it was obviously then with the sport. So I really felt like I got best of both worlds. I'm not sure if this was the same for you guys, but it was nice when I was coming home to my best pals. They don't always ask about snowboarding. They actually are just like, come on, Ben, let's go and play football, or let's go to the pub, and I'll get you a water. So yeah, I did find it important to socialize when I got home because I didn't want to lose my friends. It was one of those things. It's your friends are important, and especially afterwards, it becomes a reality that you don't want to leave your sport with no one there. So yeah, it's very important. Keep all your friends close.
One of the things that you mentioned as well, like I commented on your mindset as a 13-year-old, taking on the, Olympic medalists and just there, you want to go in and impress your coach. I find the psychology side of being a snowboarder or just being in a Winter Olympic sport in general really, really fascinating, because I guess the challenge of learning a new trick or a new skill, takes time and patience, and then being able to execute it. How important, I guess, for you, but also how important to the sport is the sort of psychological preparation? Is there anything specifically that you do, or does it just happen naturally? Or is that sort of part and parcel of being a snowboarder? You have that sort of innate feel for the movement that you need to do?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think sports psychology is a huge part of any extreme sport. Whether the athlete actually goes to a sports psychologist is maybe a different matter, but I think every single one of them would tell you, oh yeah, no, like I have to do this. I have to basically have to like go through this procedure before I do anything like that. Or if I'm trying a new trick, it has to be the most perfect morning, perfect weather. So everyone's got different things, and they probably don't even realize it. But I think what you find with a lot of the extreme sports is they're quite chilled, laid back kind of people, because I think they need to be. They can't be jumpy. They can't be sort of on edge all the time. Everyone's almost got a bit of a screw loose because it actually suits the sport so much so, because we're like risking our limbs almost every day. As a fear factor where I just did not want to try anything new again, and all these little kids were coming up and around me, and they were all throwing themselves without question, fearless like they were when they were young, and here I was starting to like build up this fear of trying to go upside down twice again. It was something that I had to sort of really work hard at. So I think after a little while of working with a sports psychologist, it brought me back into that sort of good space again, where I could unscrew the sort of screws in my head a little bit again.
I can definitely understand why that would be an issue sometimes, because sometimes I didn't even want to swim backstroke, and there's no death threats there. It is literally on your back and look at the reef, Lauren. So I can understand why there might be some struggles around that for sure. I'd like to know what competition day is like, because having been a swimmer and being in that world, competition day there can be a bit of animosity. There can be a bit of, you can cut the tension with a knife on poolside and stuff like that. But then I've experienced, for example, going to watch the Ironman in Lanzarote, where there's of course that level of competition and people wanting to beat each other, but there's also a huge level of just respect for everybody there doing it, because it's one of those things that's like, yeah, this is actually really tough. So I'm wondering where it sits in terms of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I think on competition day, I think what happens is we all sort of gather that morning. It's always an early start as well. It's always like the sun's not quite up yet, so it's cold, really icy, and everyone sort of gathers up at the top. And I think what we tend to get is about 20-30 minutes of practice before the event starts. So that can sometimes it can be as little as 2 runs. Sometimes you can maybe manage to squeeze 4 runs in. Really depends what the lap time is, or whether you're hiking the half pipe. Now, what I tend to do a lot of the times is hike the half pipe. That was normally the thing that I did. It normally take you about sort of 10 minutes to sort of get right up to the top. And that is if you landed a run, you could almost like come out of the half pipe on the wall. It always takes a lot longer if you have a little fall and you end up at the bottom, and you've got to like climb up this really steep bit first before you get into the nice sort of gradient. So yeah, I find on competition day, everyone is super chilled at the top. All the teams are talking. You tend to find everyone uplifts each other, pats each other on the back, wishes each other luck. It's a really good sport, I would say. And I would always admire like what other people had done. If someone had thrown down a really good run, you tend to find everyone corrugates around the scoreboard, so everyone's like looking what each other's getting. And yeah, I think it's a good sport to be in, definitely. I think everyone lifts each other up.
It's actually quite refreshing to sort of see that, because I think in sport we do congregate and support one another as such, but I feel in swimming it definitely is quite competitive in that you do want to beat the person next to you. So to hear sport being that sort of uplifting to everybody and anybody is actually really quite nice to hear. I've kind of got 2 questions. I'm quite curious. On competition day, you kind of mentioned everyone has this sort of set routine, perfect mornings for some individuals and all that. Did you personally have any quirks or little things or rituals that you did? I find athletes tend to like, as a swimmer, I used to always spin my arms around 4 times for fly, 8 for back, 4 for rest, 8 for free. For me, emulating 400 IM. And that was just what I did. And I always cracked my neck to the left. If I didn't crack my neck to the left, it was kind of game over kind of. So for me, that was my personal quirk and little thing that I did before my race to settle me out. Do you personally have anything like that kind of?
Yeah, no, I definitely do. So I had to put my right boot on before my left. And if I put my left boot on, fully tied it, I had to undo it and take it off and put my right back on again. So that was I don't know why I got it in my head, but I'd read about the Greeks used to apparently do that, about putting the right shoe on before the left. And it just stuck in my head, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to put my right boot on then before my left. So that was one of my rituals, but that had to start off like basically in the car park when you were actually putting on your stuff before you're going up the hill. And I think my sort of second ritual was probably just clapping my hands before I dropped in. That was the one thing. And I normally did a little bit of an ollie, like a little jump just before I popped in. And that was, I think that's kind of the only rituals that I ever had that I always did. And I knew I did it because I needed to get them in, because it just meant that game was on. So yeah, I can imagine in swimming though, that you want to do the same thing every time. Whereas on a really cold day where it's like blowing a hoolie and it's snowing and you're competing in that, sometimes you don't want to do these things. You're just like, oh, just get me down. I want to get a hot chocolate.
Oh, I love to use the phrase blowing a hoolie as well, because I'm pretty sure there's going to be some people thinking, what on earth does that mean?
I'm one of those people. I heard it and I was like, yeah, these two are in their own language now.
Sorry, I'll keep it minimal.
No, it's fine. It's good.
It's good. No, it's all good. So was there a particular trick that for you was like a go-to that you would always do, or you're always striving to work on having it different each time? I guess, again, kind of referring back to swimmers, we have the 4 strokes. We always knew butterfly, backstroke, breaststroke, freestyle, and it was just all about time, getting quicker and quicker. For a sport like snowboarding, I guess it's all about, is the tricks. Is it how much air you get as well? Does that get included in the points? And yeah, it's quite gymnastic based, I feel. So yeah, could you just describe a little bit more about, I guess, how the scoring system works, and for you, what your favorite trick was, or your kind of go-to trick would be?
Yeah. So the judges are looking for amplitude. They're looking for variety. So that means like your variety, you've got four rotations to basically spin on. There's actually a lot more than that, but I'll not get in too technical. But they look for you to spin in all the directions that are possible. And then, amplitude, and then consistency, really, to make sure like for example, if you saw someone doing a 22-foot first hit, and then their second hit was 15 and their third hit was 10 foot, so they were getting smaller and smaller, they would dock you down on that, whereas they actually like to see an average height. They like to see consistency all the way down. And then there's obviously docking for hand touches, bum drags, for basically not clean lines. So you need to keep like a clean edge. So you'll see quite a lot of this. You'll probably analyze it next when you see it at this Olympics. But if you see someone that does a really spectacular run, but they make it look easy, then the judges will reward that so much more. And absolutely love it in a new trick that's never been done before, which has basically scored you. I mean, you've seen some of these scores from Shaun White at the X Games where he gets a perfect score. It's because he's basically done a run that's never been done before. So they tend to reward that. They're like, okay, this is the best run that's ever been done. It's a max score. So it has happened. And I hope it does happen at this Olympics, because I think that there's some runs that are not quite put together just yet, but you might see them put together at the Olympics this time.
Wow. I think I've been in trouble for bum drags and butterfly, to be honest. So at least there's some crossovers going on here. Anyway, Killdog.
Hey.
I read, or Hannah told me, that this is your nickname. Could you please explain Killdog, why your name is Killdog?
Yeah, so this is going back a while as well. So we were in Switzerland one year, and 2 guys that I was with, Tim Warwood, who's a BBC presenter now, he was coming up with all these, we just watched Top Gun, and we were coming up with all these call signs for us as a group. So everyone had their own call sign. And mine was Killdog, and it was one of those things that just, it started off on that trip and it just carried through to the next trip. And then after that, everyone started calling me Killdog. And then even people that I'd never met before were like, oh, Killdog. So, and you know what? I've not heard it in a long time, but funnily enough, one of my staff members, I've got a little tub of protein at the gym that I use, and I saw this sticker on it and it said Killdog on it. And I was like, oh, no way, I've not seen this in years. I was like, who's done this? So one of the staff boys was like, oh, I heard you're called Killdog. So funnily enough, that was just today as well.
Wow. And my question to follow on from that was, you did go to 2 Olympics, 2010 and 2014. And this is going to be a big question here, but how was the Olympics?
You know what? Absolutely amazing. When you get to the Olympics, it's a really surreal experience the first time. I think you don't quite soak it all in. It's almost like you're still just pinching yourself the whole trip. And I just remember almost forgetting that I was actually there to compete, because there was this 24-hour free food and a free McDonald's, and there was all this free memorabilia that you kept getting from everyone. It's like, oh, it was so amazing. And especially, I think, obviously, when we were in Vancouver, the Canadians were just, it was just an amazing experience. Obviously, they're such like so into their winter sports, so it's a great like hosting nation. And I just remember coming out of that absolutely buzzing. So I think second time around, I managed to really focus on a little bit more of like what I was there to do. But yeah, my experience from the both of them Olympics, both Sochi and Vancouver, was we had really bad weather that really affected the half pipe. So both them Olympics were actually, in terms of like conditions, were really, really bad. So it was nice to see when it was Pyeongchang that they finally got perfect conditions for a perfect half pipe. It was cold enough. And I hope that they have that in Beijing. I have heard it's really nice and cold where they are. So we'll hopefully get a good show.
I guess kind of touching on a little bit about the Winter Olympics just going on, who would you say were sort of top athletes to maybe look out for? So if we were to watch it, I guess in your sort of in 2010 and 2014, you know, I think in 2010 you were the only GB athlete for the Winter Olympics. So I guess who are the GB athletes that we should be keeping an eye on coming into the Beijing 2022 games?
Yeah, so Kirsty Muir, freestyle skier. I don't want to add like pressure to her, and she's probably not going to see this. She'll try and maybe switch herself off to the world, but I really think and I hope she gets herself a medal, because I think she deserves it. She's a very strong push. We've got Izzy Atkin, James Woods, and then Katie Omrod for snowboarding. She's in slopestyle as well. So we've got a really like strong team that are there, although it may not be as big as what we put out to Pyeongchang. I think that the athletes that are there are real medal contenders. And that's just on obviously in like the freestyle side of things. And Katie will obviously be doing slopestyle and big air, so 2 events and 2 chances. And I think, yeah, I've seen some videos of like the other athletes. Like I've seen the figure skaters; they look amazing. The bobslayers look great. So I really hope that this will be the biggest medal haul that Team GB have. Like I'm sure everyone's kind of willing them on to try and break the record. So I do think Team GB, they are getting stronger at every Winter Olympics. And I know we've already got a really strong summer team. But I think we're slowly getting there with the winter side. Might take a bit of time to catch up with the US, but we'll get there.
I think so. I mean, I've been watching the curling. I think we're already on track, so it's all going to be good. I know it is. And I always love it when it comes around because it just kind of, it's not obviously televised enough, the sports individually in between. So it's really good to see it obviously on TV.
Yeah.
What would you say your biggest learnings from the Olympics were? Or if maybe not the Olympics, maybe some other competition that you did where you thought, or it was kind of a turning point for you?
Well, funnily enough, so a lot of people say like, what's the best event that I've ever done? And it was actually 3 weeks prior to Vancouver Olympics. We were doing the Team GB holding camp out there, and there was a World Cup in Calgary as well. And it just so happened to be kind of, I had staff kind of there with me, and I had Princess Anne as well. So she came up to watch, and I just so happened to put down my Olympic run. So this was me trying out my new run at the time, and it got me into the finals. And this was it kind of happened every now and then. I got into finals because it's quite tough. I had a tough career, but I managed to land my Olympic run in finals, which got me basically my first ever World Cup medal. Sorry, my dog's shaking. I'm trying to stop him. He's obviously itchy. And that was the first ever half pipe medal in a World Cup for snowboarding. So I was kind of happy to sort of break that trend that would never got medals for the Team GB until that point, and that just set me on a complete high going into Vancouver. So that was probably the biggest and best event that I'd done.
I'm just taking a wee note there actually, because I love that, as you say, because I think sometimes in the summer sports there is a lot of pressure and push for the medals, and even you mentioned there, I think Team GB is going to do an incredible job with the medals. But your career's been just as successful regardless of whether you've had medals or not, and it's so refreshing to hear your own personal experiences within your sport. And you, as Lauren mentioned there, that was the question I had on the tip of my tongue, and I just could not get out about the learning curve. I was like, there was a reason why I was asking this question. So you mentioned there, like, your biggest learning curve coming into your career. What about as a youngster, if you could speak to yourself, after all the years of experience that you had, the little 10-year-old you starting out, what advice would you give yourself? Would you change anything, or what kind of key words would you kind of say to yourself, to 10-year-old Ben?
I think I would have probably told like my younger self to push harder, quicker. I think not that I regret anything, because it kind of forged the way I went anyway, but I think I hesitated at the start. I didn't know if I actually wanted to do snowboarding until I was about 13. That's when it really kind of took off. And when I started at 9, I think if I could go back, I would almost tell myself, you're going to get to the Olympics, but you could get to Turin. And because I narrowly missed out on Turin, I was sort of 5 points short of qualifying. And that was what that completely fueled me to get to Vancouver. It made me so annoyed with myself that I hadn't completely pushed earlier. And I think I would just tell myself to basically get on with it a bit sooner. Stop faffing around, trying to still play golf and tennis and trying to do all these other things. Just stick to snowboarding. But no, I can't fully beat myself up. But I think that's one of the things that I would kind of tell myself, my younger self. But other than that, I think I've escaped as many injuries as I could. There's obviously a few that I definitely couldn't escape, but I would try and pop up to every point before I dropped in before I was actually breaking bones, I would have stopped myself and just said, just think about it, Ben. Just save yourself.
I would have told Ben, don't worry about it. In 3 years, you're going to become British champ. It's fine. It's good. I'm going to bring it down a bit because I think it's important, and we have spoke about things that have been tough already, but I think it's important for people to hear that it's not just all the highs, there are lows as well. And so if you wouldn't mind sharing, I would love to actually listen to maybe one of your lowest points or your lowest point, and was it due to injury or just something mental or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I've probably got two low points. The first one being actually after Russia was, you've probably heard of like Olympic blues, and I definitely had that. I was on such a downer after Russia. I really wanted to perform better than I did, and I was very hard on myself. And at the time, my sister moved out she was working in Dubai, and I'd gone home, and I was just like, okay, I'm just going to take a bit of time off. And I was on a proper downer, and my sister phoned me and just said, Ben, get yourself over here, come and stay with me for a month. And that really, like, it was a good time to sort of think. And obviously when Russia was over, that was sort of still in the middle of the peak of the season. This is what he does.
This is amazing.
When I ignore him.
This is getting clipped into the snippets. It has to. Normally it's a cat that does that.
Yeah, I know. No, this is when I ignore him. He starts to like, I can wear him as like a hot water bottle around my neck. But yeah, so he's obviously understanding that I'm talking about my low points, so he's trying to cheer me up. My second low point was when I broke my pelvis in 2016. Now this was on the build up to basically trying to qualify for Pyeongchang, and it put me out. I couldn't really walk. Sorry. Come on down. There we go. All right. Oh dear. Right. So back to the story. So when I broke my pelvis, that put me on a bit of a downer as well. I couldn't walk for 6 weeks. It put an end to that sort of year of training, but I kind of wanted to prove to myself then at that point that I needed to get back on my feet. I needed to get back competing as well. So I made it a mission to obviously get back snowboarding. And the first event that I actually was recovered for was British Championships again. So I went back out to Switzerland where it was held, and I managed to win. And at that point there, I think I'd already spoken to Anne Thompson that worked for BBC, and I'd told her if I win, then I would retire. So I wanted to finish it on a high. And I think mentally it was one of those things that I had to sort of make that important decision that I'd really, really tried hard to come back from like my broken pelvis. But I couldn't see myself getting back to the Olympics. I had to sort of take that reality check. So that was a really hard point. And when I won, Anne published the sort of article of me retiring, and that was it. The decision was made. So I felt really good about that, and I don't regret any bit of that now. I'm really happy I did that. So that fixed me. I think it made me sort of come home with a smile on my face.
That's actually, again, really quite refreshing to hear, because some athletes might not get the opportunity to have their way of finishing a sport the way that they'd like to. Sometimes it gets taken out of their hands. And for you to feel satisfied that that was how you wanted to retire, you know, it is really positive to hear. And especially being able to come back with a smile on your face and still finish the sport that you love, still enjoying it. So how's the transition been? So what were the steps once you retired going into, I guess, the next chapter in your career? Where did that take you?
So I think at that point, so when I'd gone out to British Champs before that trip, I actually put like a deposit down on a unit, and this was open up like a little PT sort of coaching studio, and I think I got the news that day that I'd competed that I'd won the bid to basically take on this unit. So I just put an offer in before I left and got the news that I'd got it. So it was it was like a double win almost, and that really put focus on the next chapter. It was all about trying to then get myself into this sort of business mode, which I'd never ever been in. And you got to, obviously, when you start your own business, you just got to learn on the road. You don't know half of the stuff. No one teaches you any of that. So that was sort of the next chapter. Then it was all focused on starting a gym.
Did you have the idea to do that? Did you want to do that for a long time? Like, did you start thinking about that before you actually retired, or was it something that happened like, right, oh gosh, I need to get into gear now? Because there is a bit of a stigma or a misconception around sometimes athletes feeling like if they start to think about their career afterwards, they're not fully focused correctly on what they need to do now. Whereas actually it's a good thing to have an idea.
Oh, definitely. And I think I don't think there's any shame in thinking about your future career, because I think it's important to get the right steps done earlier the better, really. I mean, you're very lucky if your career takes you to a point sort of financially where you don't need to worry. And I find a lot of people sometimes fall into this sort of roles naturally, whereas other people have to literally get home and they are in the real world where things are not done for you. So like me, it's like all of us. So yeah, I think it's trying to make important decisions. So when I was kind of on the road, this is a long time before I actually did my PT course, and the Scottish Institute at the time, they were brilliant. They kind of encouraged you to get on with the course and get some education done on the side venture. And I know, obviously, I left school after the standard grades. I didn't go on to university at the time, so I always felt like there was just a little bit missing. I just needed something to get me by and something to fall back on as such.
So I guess having an active lifestyle for you, being in sport, continuing sport, I guess, in a different sort of sense in your next chapter, was that always the plan? Did you feel that was kind of that natural progression for you to kind of stick within sport? I guess the gym industry, it's sport in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
You now do quite a fair bit of CrossFit as well.
I do, yeah. Yeah, so obviously, as soon as competition sort of ended, I didn't realise until about sort of 3 years later, I was really missing that competitive sort of, that drive. I just had something missing. So yeah, I sort of got introduced to CrossFit, and it kind of opened up my world of how kind of hard you could actually push the body in a sense when there was almost like no sport holding you back. And not that snowboarding was holding me back, but I only wanted to be fit for snowboarding. I didn't need to acquire a set of skills that were needed elsewhere. I just wanted to be strong and healthy and fit for snowboarding to get me through a season. Now, when I started CrossFit, it felt like I'd lifted the lid. I could put on a little bit more weight. I didn't need to watch myself, because obviously when you're a lot of the snowboarders you'll find are quite agile and kind of light, like cats, whereas now I'm more like a dog, I suppose. So, but yeah, my hometown's not had a gym, and it didn't have a gym pretty much for my whole kind of youth. I went to a local sports centre, which had a really small room with a couple of weights. And I always said to myself that if I retired from snowboarding, that I would start a gym in my own town. So that's where I think that's where the idea came from. That's why I chose Banchory, because it was my hometown, and I knew that it was something that was missing.
Do you still get on the snowboard? And if so, do you still do all the tricks and show off in front of everyone? Or do you just go, no, I'm just going to enjoy it and just, I don't know, what's that like now?
Oh, no, I definitely get carried away very easily. You could almost say that there's like, I don't know if it's the lack of fear or stupidity now, but if someone's built a jump down at the local golf course, then it just I don't know, some trigger goes off. I just have to do a little backflip, and then I can at least go home happy. But I funnily enough, over lockdown last time, when the mountains were closed, we had so much snow around us, and my neighbour bought a snowmobile, and he actually drove it down to the house and came and picked me up. So we went snowboarding off in the fields, and he pulled me along. And I mean, it was the best season I've had in a long time. But I mean, that's what good neighbours are for. But yeah, he bought the snowmobile. We enjoyed the winter whilst it was here, and then he went and sold it, and that was that. It was. So that's my last time I've been snowboarding, but I really am hoping to get up this year to Glenshee. That's if the snow arrives. It's still very warm.
I love the fact as well that snowboarding is still very much a part of you and who you are. And I guess sport teaches us a lot of things. You know, we learn a lot about ourselves. There's lots of life lessons along the way. Could you sum up how snowboarding's shaped your life? Like, are there a lot of things from your career as a snowboarder now as a gym owner and as a businessman? Are there any crossovers between the two?
Absolutely. It's a good question. I think that sport and business are very comparable in a sense that if you have committed to getting somewhere like the Olympics, you can treat that exact same drive in business, that you can set your goals as a business, and you can set out to help other people, such as like the likes of your teammates and things. Because I found that when I retired, along with quite a few friends of mine, like my teammates, a lot of the times it was kind of like I used to get a lot of questions as to like, oh Ben, how do you think I should go about this, or do you think this is a good idea? So I think the teammates we've all kind of found our areas now, but there was always a lot of questions when we were thinking about retiring, and when we did retire, I think it's taking a leap of faith almost all over again. I mean, there's nothing scarier than going on and literally listing your business name on Companies House and suddenly paying tax and national insurance and paying your staff salaries. But all this stuff is always quite scary, and it's kind of like how it was in snowboarding. It was going on your first trip away is scary, leaving your parents. You're kind of left to your own devices. Everything in sport can be scary like that.
My final question for you, Ben, I mean, it's always good to ask the athletes that we have on, because we learn so much from sport, and we obviously hope to help the younger athletes coming through. One piece of advice, I'm sure you've been asked this question before, that you would give to a young athlete or a young snowboarder in particular, or whatever you would like to, whatever answer you would like to give us, but just that one piece of advice. Well,
I'll pass on a piece of advice that I got, and it's from a guy called Christian Stevenson, an American. He's actually a chef now, and he just told me to go fast, take chances. And I think that going fast is the reason for that being is we are only young for a certain period of time. And I think it's so important in your young years to actually make sure you progress as fast as you can whilst you can, because things only get slower. And I've noticed my recovery rate is not quite the same as what it used to be. And if you're going to be in sport, you need to be fairly young. I mean, there's very rare sports out there that you can actually stay in good shape into your sort of 40s to 70s, let's say. We all have to be fairly young in our physical prime. So I think it's making sure that people don't take their time. They actually do try to achieve the goals as quickly and as fast as possible, and take them chances to get them as far into their sport as they possibly can.
Sounded like Rafa was agreeing with you in the background there.
Yeah, did you hear that?
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, 19 years of being a snowboarder and many more years to come as, you know, a business owner, and still attaching yourself to the back of a snowplow on your snowboard, you know, probably well into your 70s. I mean, you said that, you know, the sport is for the young, but I'd say the sport, you know, they can be for the, you know, you're proving, I mean, not saying that you're old.
I was going to say, Hannah, where are you going with it?
No, I am old.
But I can envision you, like, until your 80s or 90s still being on that snowboard. Like, it's with you for life. You know, as you say, yeah, maybe not as agile as the cat, but yeah, you still don't lose the love for it and the feel for it. It just might not be in the same sort of physical peak condition, but doesn't mean that you can shot and try.
I'd like to think that I'd be taking my grandkids snowboarding for the first time. So let's hope.
I'm sure. And you can show off and all that kind of stuff and win everything. It's fine. Ben, honestly, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real pleasure listening to your story, chatting to you about your time in sport and all the things that you've learned. So from both of us, just a huge thank you.
No, thank you guys. Honestly, it is nice. Like I say, it's great to get the opportunity to sort of reminisce in some old memories. So thanks for asking the awesome questions.
Thank you for listening to this episode with Ben. It's been brilliant, as I said before. We really appreciate you coming on. We have a new guest as well next week on next week's episode. So we look forward to you joining us then. But to finish off, thank you, Ben, and we will see you next week.